Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this talk. My name is Mafalda Duarte. I'm the head of the Climate Investment Funds. We are basically an $8.3 billion multilateral climate fund housed here at the World Bank, and we are supporting 72 developing countries globally with the much needed and urgently needed resources for them to tackle and manage the challenges related to climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, thereby supporting our global climate goal. Why is climate change important? I think there is no week at this point in time when there aren't relevant articles in the news speaking about events that are happening globally that reflect these impacts of climate change, and also articles that alert us to the expected impacts that are foreseen in the short to medium term. Just a couple of examples, and you've probably come across this. This year we were faced with a super El Nino, and what this has produced is reductions in harvests of key crops, stable crops, and dramatic food price spikes. In Malawi, for example, July this year, they observed maize prices which were 192% higher than the 5-year average. Scientists also call 2016 the year of marine heat, or the blob, for those of you who have come across it. And this has severe consequences. If we look at the death of species, seabirds, sea lions, whales in the coast of California all the way to Canada, or the die-off of corals and kelp forests on the northern Pacific Ocean in Australia. So these are not abstract concepts or realities. These are things that are happening. The last year has also brought us hope and the potential for change and progress with some significant political achievements. You all know about the Paris Agreement that basically commits us globally as an international community to keep increase of global temperatures to 2 degrees, and an ambition to, in fact, keep it at 1.5. And there are other significant initiatives that we keep hearing of corporations coming together and also committing to greenhouse gas emission targets that will align them with those goals. While this is a reason for hope, the challenge is unprecedented because we need to do a lot of things and we need to do them fast. And we are not talking anymore to meet these goals, the Paris Agreement goals. We're not talking anymore about just a few billions of dollars. We are talking about trillions of dollars that are needed to help us meet those goals, Paris Agreement goals, and the Sustainable Development Goals. And so, and we also know, another important point is we also know that massive investments in infrastructure will occur in the next couple of decades. It's in the trillions of dollars of investments. And we want to make sure, 70% of which in developing countries, we want to make sure that these investments do not continue to lock us in fossil fuel-based economies. So we need these investments to be in low carbon and resilient infrastructure. What's the role of climate finance? Why is it, and to me, why do I call it the important and much needed game changer? Is because climate finance allows us to do a few very important things. One is provides the type of resources that incentivize changes in the policy, regulatory, and institutional environments. Two, they do something else. They allow for what are already mature and proven commercial technologies available worldwide to be deployed for the first time or be scaled significantly in developing countries. What climate finance also does is help us address risks that are inherent in certain technologies, no matter if these investments occur in developing countries or developed countries. And they allow for something else, which is allow for investments in less proven technologies or less mature technologies, but nevertheless technologies that will be very important for us to meet our climate goals. Let me give you a few examples so that you can relate these concepts to something tangible. What we have been doing, and actually we have been proving this over the past 8 years through the hundreds of projects we have in our portfolio. Imagine countries where the commercial banks have not yet offered to the entrepreneurs and to the investors and to the local communities lines of credit for energy efficiency, for agroforestry, for water efficiency. These are the type of resources that will help us work with those local commercial institutions and financial institutions to help them understand how they can tap into this business opportunity and make an offer to these entrepreneurs and local communities that will be an offer that will actually drive them to make those investment decisions. And because these would be the first type of investments in these countries and markets, we would also be supporting an important element, which is that the financing terms are attractive to drive that those decision-making processes and allow these communities, entrepreneurs, and investors to make those investment decisions. Another example is we might be talking about technologies that are mature and readily deployed in developed countries, but they've never been deployed in developing countries, or because of risks, because of costs, or they have just barely been deployed. This type of finance allows for those investments to happen and give confidence that those are investments, bankable investments in developing countries. Another example is of what I was saying before, a technology that has a risk embedded in its investment process, geothermal, and this is independent as to whether or not the investment is done in developing countries or developed countries. While the steam and the heat is not proven, how much steam and heat we can get from Earth, there's a very significant high risk. And so that's basically what has been preventing much larger deployment or investments in this technology to happen. And so we are here trying to actually support adding 3.6 gigawatt of geothermal capacity globally, which is one third of all of the global installed capacity. This is very significant, and it's going to be the first of its kind in many countries. The last point that I made is climate finance, its key role in terms of the less mature technologies. Here I'm going to give you another example, concentrated solar power. You might have heard about it because of the recent COP in Morocco. This is still a costly technology, much more costly than fossil fuel alternatives, and one in which we have to reach a certain level of scale to bring costs down and establish a record of performance. There again, we are working very significantly and trying to support adding on 1 gigawatt more of this technology globally. In countries, in developing countries, where the opportunity is very large because of its solar radiation levels. So I want to end, now that I've explained why I think climate finance is a game changer, and it's not because of some abstract concept, it's because we have been proving it over the past 8 years. And we actually have been doing it. The climate investment funds were established in 2008. Thank you very much. At the time of the financial crisis, and where we didn't yet have a climate agreement. And we have been proving over the past 8 years the role that this type of finance can play. We are very proud, and I'm very proud to see so many first-of-its-kind investments in so many of the countries that we are supporting. So we understand the challenge. We understand the pace and the scale of what needs to be done, and we are seeking ways as well to continue to contribute to that challenge. And so we are also coming up with new financing vehicles that will be unique as well, and we will be piloting and trying to mobilize capital, the much-needed capital that exists, but it's not going for this type of investments in developing countries. I went to Morocco and delivered the same message. This is possible. We have proven it. We will be doing our best to share all of our lessons and experiences with everyone. But it is very important that not only that we all mobilize ourselves to do more, but that we make sure that this type of finance, climate finance, is available and continues to play this game-changing role that it has been playing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mafalda. I'd encourage you to have a seat, and I'd like to open it up for some questions from the audience.
Hello, my name is Phil, and I just have a question that is also an example. So let's say we take Connect4Climate and we advertise it to the government and say, these are the issues, this is what we would like to be done and help our planet. But when it comes to spending, how can we not only force but easily progress and let other governments know that it's going to cost them a lot of money to build these infrastructures to help our planet and atmosphere?
So a couple, is this, okay, I need to have it closer to me. So a couple of things there. One is, and I speak for developing countries because this is where we focus our attention. We know that it is a priority for all of these governments to, and I was referring to make substantive investments in infrastructure because they know that these infrastructure investments will be key for them to drive growth, economic growth, social development, and poverty reduction. So the one thing there is basically to help them overcome the additional costs of having to make certain investment decisions, which are still at this stage more costly than certain alternatives, fossil fuel investment alternatives in many parts of the world. And so this is what we have been doing and continue to appeal that this type of resources become available to help them achieve that and prevent them from making investment decisions now, because when you invest in a power plant, you are locking that investment for decades. And we don't want that to happen. We want that right now they make the choices of the cleaner technology investments or cleaner investments. The other thing, of course, that we also emphasize quite a bit is, you were mentioning, and let's not underestimate this fact of enabling countries to learn from what other countries are doing, because a lot of these investments are still new. So I give you some examples from Africa. The concentrated solar power project in Morocco, several other countries have gone and learned from Morocco How did, what was the regulatory framework? What is the institutional framework? What was the structure? How did the finance come together for in those projects? Other examples, exchange with Kenya on geothermal, bringing other countries that in the Rift Valley region of Africa that have the geothermal potential, that have the resource, but they haven't done anything yet. They don't have a regulatory framework, they don't have a policy framework, they don't have the institutional capacity within the government. So allow for those exchanges so that more easily the countries can embark on that path. We have other examples. We've supported very interesting lines of credit in Tajikistan. So the local commercial banks providing lines of credit to local communities in terms of small farming investments, but do them using water efficient technologies. And an interest from many parts of for many other countries globally to learn from that experience, and several others in our portfolio. So I wanted to touch on both. It's both a learning and sharing of experience, allowing for that to happen, but also allowing for the costs of alternatives to match or be as close as possible to the fossil fuel type of investments.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, maybe there on the end. Okay, we'll take two questions and combine it into one answer.
Hi. I wonder if you just focus on the developing country and not developed country. For example, the Eastern California has a lot of potential developing geothermals. So do Japan, and they have like plenty of like monetary money basically to develop it. Like the reason why they don't develop it, and while you are providing funding to like developing country to like develop like alternative resources, that I don't know, is it just like why the developed country are not like doing it and setting an example and maybe do some technological exchange? Well, I'm wondering if money is the only factor that is limiting the developing country from like developing alternative energy source. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nisa from Environmental Law Institute. I have actually two questions. One is, you can answer whichever you want to. The investment fund, how is it allocating its investment in adaptation-related projects and mitigation, or if there is a priority that's given to either mitigation or adaptation investments? And my second question is, there are a lot of accountability issues that are being raised in the flow of climate finance in developing countries. If you have any example to share of such challenge that you faced with any of the developing country and how you overcame it. Thanks.
Okay, so I'll try to be very quick and answer all of them. Certainly, I think developed countries can also benefit from the lessons that are being generated in some of these investments in developing countries, because we are testing new things, new financial structures, for example. And certainly, that's something that we can also can certainly do. In terms of investments, our mandate is very clear. We focus on developing countries in supporting them, and don't be misguided. My message is not that, it's not just the investment side that is important. It's all of the spectrum of interventions from the policy level, regulatory level, all the way to investment. But this type of finance has been critical for the reasons that I was explaining, and I do think that it will continue to play a significant role because these countries are fiscally constrained, and it's understandable that they might make the choices that are not as fiscally heavy as alternatives, and therefore the need for us to have these instruments to allow them to make those investment choices and not overburden them with higher costs than alternatives. On adaptation, we have one of the largest adaptation programs as well. If you go online and check the pilot program for climate resilience, is 1.1 billion, and it mobilizes a lot of other investments. We have been piloting a very successful programmatic approach. I don't have the time to expand here, which has actually contributed to significant change in terms of the institutional frameworks in country and the policy frameworks to take climate adaptation into account in their own development planning and budgeting processes. And we have been piloting a lot of investments, like the one I was mentioning in Tajikistan, is an innovation that comes out of that large program as well. You mentioned the point on accountability. I think that has been one of the key premises of the climate investment funds. The engagement with all of the relevant stakeholders in the design, preparation, and implementation of the programs. I'm not going to say that it's ideal everywhere, but it is very important. You achieve accountability and sustainability. This is a key mechanism to achieve sustainability and accountability, is the engagement of the ultimate beneficiaries all the way through the process. So that's what I can say. It's very, very critical. And by doing so, we are also working with the governments in trying to help them enhance their own systems of stakeholder engagement and accountability to their own citizens.
Thank you, Mafalda. So you've heard it from Mafalda Duarte, the program manager for the climate investment funds. We are in a very exciting time. Over the next 15 years, it looks like we're going to be implementing infrastructure to the tune of about 90 trillion if you're thinking of the new climate economy. Just in the developing countries alone, it's at least 23 trillion, according to our own research at the IFC. And really at that forefront of this development, this clean infrastructure implementation, we've got the climate investment funds. I encourage you to check out their website, have a look at all the projects that they're involved in. These are some of the most interesting technological innovations. These are some of the most cutting-edge energy technologies, as well as resilience building projects. So thank you so very much for your time, and have a look at the climate investment funds.